nature of the loss itself and how that loss occurred, and the nature of other relationships involved, just to name a few things that can influence how we grieve and how we experience grief. There are also some myths, some common myths that live in our culture that can be helpful to address. Number one, grief is not time limited. It's not something we get over as much as something that we learn to adapt to and learn how to live with. It's an ongoing process that changes over time. Grief is also not a linear process. It doesn't begin with high intensity and then gradually taper off until it's not very evident. It tends to be a very up and down process, like a roller coaster. And again, that lasts for an extended period of time, often unpredictable. There's also no right or wrong way to grieve. There are no particular stages that a person has to pass through in order to be grieving. And grief is not bad. It's not something to be avoided or to be moved through quickly, and it's not something we can fix. It is very painful, and there's no way around that. To quote Earl Grolman, who's a rabbi and pioneer in the field of crisis intervention, grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. The other piece that I wanted to offer to everyone is that grief is multidimensional. It shows up in many aspects of our lives and in our daily functioning. It's not just restricted to a set of feelings. So the many ways in which it can show up, it being expressed, is physical, mental or cognitive, social, certainly emotional, behavioral, and spiritual. So to go through each of those just briefly, physically, a lot of people experience grief as partially through fatigue, great fatigue. Also sleep disruption. People may find themselves sleeping more or having difficulty sleeping at all or having interrupted sleep. Appetite changes, either eating more than normal or having a loss of appetite, having difficulty feeling any sense of appetite. Other kinds of physical symptoms can show up. For some, it might be a shortness of breath. It can be panic attacks. People who, where the loss has created a real sense of uncertainty in terms of what comes next. An anxiety response is fairly common. Tightness in the throat or chest, stomach upset or pain, are just a few examples. Of course, anytime someone has significant physical symptoms, it's never a good idea to just assume that's all grief. It's always good to have those things checked out, but just to know that those can be part of what occurs when you're grieving. On a cognitive level, often there's a phase, so to speak, of shock or numbness that can come right after a loss, where people feel detached and don't have much feeling response. That can be a normal reaction to a trauma. It's a form of self-protection. There can be confusion and disorientation, which is very common, poor concentration, difficulty tracking things, remembering things. I have heard numerous stories about people who will forget where they parked the car or put their car keys in the freezer, or completely forget a really important call or appointment. It's a very common experience. Wishing, having dreams about the person they've lost or the situation that they have lost. This kind of sense of wanting to reclaim, and that can show up in a person's dream life as you process this loss. And having additional losses, even small ones, can trigger kind of a return to other losses in life. So it can become a layered experience, especially as more loss is experienced. Um, and often, and I'll also point out that I've heard many stories, I've found this is a common part of grieving. People have these experiences where they feel if it's a person they've lost, they feel their presence. They feel they either hear them for a moment, they may think they saw them for a moment. It's a common experience. It's one that worries people. They think they're going a little crazy. So I pointed out as a reassurance that is not what's happening. I see it as memory that lives in our bodies and shows up at times as we are adjusting to a life without this important person or other thing that we've lost. Socially, there can be adjustments. I'm watching the time, so I don't go over. Often people have a phase where they just want to cocoon. They want to pull in and not be engaged with other people, which can be worrisome sometimes to those who care about them. It's also a fairly common response. It's just a need to pull in and to not engage, to not expend energy really in relationships or other interactions. So avoiding situations too that arouse grief, returning to situations, talking to people that are closely connected to that loss can trigger the grief responses. So avoiding those situations. Worry about concerning others with their grief, burdening others with their grief. I hear this a lot too. That they don't want to be the Debbie Downer of the group. They feel like after a certain period of time, it's not appropriate, or people don't want to hear about their loss. And that can be a challenge for people who are grieving, because again, grieving is ongoing, and being able to talk about it can make a difference. So finding people who are open to that ongoing conversation can really make a difference. A need to tell the story about the loss again and again as a way of processing it, as a way of coming to terms with it, shifting it into reality more and more, can be very helpful to people in a social situation. And sometimes people who are grieving feel that they're avoided a bit by family and friends, that people step back. And it can be another source of worry and concern for somebody who is grieving. That this is a time when they need most people to step in. But I find that often folks don't know what to say or to do, and they worry they're going to make it worse, so they don't engage. And that creates a whole new issue. So that's how things can show up socially. Emotionally, again, a roller coaster of emotions. It can be a very confusing mix of feelings that come up and contradicting feelings at the same time, which can be very disconcerting to folks. A sense of emotional vulnerability, of feeling just very raw much of the time. A loneliness, even when you're around other people, because this grief is something that's carried 24/7 and it's not visible to other people. So just knowing that even when somebody isn't visibly crying or isn't actively talking about their grief, they are still carrying that loss. It's still with them. And so that can create the sense of being in a different place than other people much of the time. Anger is a common reaction. Anger at the person they've lost, anger at the circumstances that created the loss. It's a common experience. Guilt and regret are common experiences, things that people work through, thinking the would have, could have, should have, might I have done something different? Could that have made a difference? It's kind of reworking all of the details that led up to the loss. A sense of apathy, just not interested in anything, in re-engaging in things that had been enjoyable previously, is a common response, emotional response. And then a fear that having positive experiences, moving forward in life, is somehow a betrayal of those, if the loss was a person, a betrayal of that connection, which is not the case, and that'll get talked about more by other panel members. But it's a common worry that people have this they feel like they need to be grieving all the time, basically, if they're giving their loved one the due respect, and that can be a challenge for folks. And then behaviorally, it can be challenging for folks who are working through loss to just navigate all of the changes in routine, the changes in tasks, the loss of tasks or routines that are involved in that loss. For folks who had been a caregiver, adjusting to not providing care literally from one day to the next is a huge adjustment and loss in and of itself, the sense of purpose and direction that came from being present and caring for their loved one. But the same can be said for loss of work and the meaning that comes from work. So again, going back to kind of the bigger COVID picture, so many losses out there that impact how people view themselves and their purpose in life. So difficulty kind of completing tasks is a behavioral thing, just having a hard time staying on track, getting things done, and looking for things that help them make that transition from in dealing with loss. Again, referring primarily to people, looking at pictures, listening to videos, doing things that remind them of that person or help them kind of still capture that person's presence in their life. Talking to or searching for the deceased comes up a lot, and can be very helpful actually in early phases, is continuing literally continuing that conversation with a loved one by allowing a person to kind of speak out loud to them. And visiting a grave site regularly, many people find that soothing. And again, it's not something that is time limited. It's not like it's just okay to do that for the first few months and then people should move away from it. Some people find that very comforting for an extended period of time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then finally, spiritually, before I run out of time, is, of course, when a person has experienced a significant loss, it can cause them to kind of think again about, what do I believe? What is my place in this world? What are my spiritual beliefs? Why did this happen now? Why to me, or why to this loved one? Feeling sometimes a little betrayed by their higher power, that they're experiencing such pain. It can be a very common response. It doesn't mean people lose their faith. It means they engage with it more in some ways. They really examine it more now that they've been faced with this personal crises. So in global terms, those would be some of the main responses that people experience, and the ways in which grief can show up. So I hope that's been a little helpful in kind of expanding the picture of what is grief and how do we define it, how do we experience it.
Thanks, Julia. That was great.
Oh, you're welcome.
Great. I think that preps us to move into our next panelist. And let me introduce Reverend David Deerfeeder with YOLO Hospice. David entered the field of death, dying, and bereavement in the mid-1980s, working in the funeral industry and also associating with Francis House, a Florida-based Franciscan outreach to persons infected or affected by HIV and AIDS. He later was invited to join Camp Living Springs, a Presidential National Point of Light award-winning program for adults diagnosed with cancer. He was associated with a hospital oncology unit and is currently an on-call minister for a California hospital. He initially joined YOLO Hospice as a patient care volunteer and has been the bereavement support manager for 2 years. Among his innovative programs is a weekly anticipatory loss support group. Big words, David, big words. Attended by patients as well as their intimates and caregivers. He is a freelance writer with a regular column in the Daily Republic newspaper and has been published by Healing Ministry Journal. He won the Wings and Strings Americana songwriting competition and has performed as a professional musician for longer than he cares to admit. David will orient us today to various types of grief with an emphasis on anticipatory grief, a broadening of perspective, and the importance of self-care. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And Julia, that was a splendid overview. And so thank you for that. The I want to start by kind of springing off of what you said a little bit. One of the things that I look at is the physiology of grief. What's going on inside our brain that causes some of those responses? Not all of them, but some of them. And we have this, especially with anticipatory loss that comes in. Anticipatory loss, as I define it, is a impact by any significant illness. So that's why the group that I have is for people who have an illness and for people who know someone with an illness and are in some relationship with them. Things tend to be in flux all the time with a chronic illness. And so where I'm going to focus today is going to be for the people who are around that patient. And this will involve the patient as well, but just for the sake of a few minutes and an overview, let's take a look at perhaps the spouse of a patient who has a significant illness. In the beginning, there's a little bit of adjustment that needs to be made, but perhaps there's not as many adjustments on any given day. So, but then there begin to be more adjustments as time goes on. And in those adjustments, there are losses that are happening. Maybe the loss of that person to be able to drive themselves to appointments. Maybe the loss of their ability to remember things. Maybe the loss of their ability to make sure that they're maintaining a good diet. There's just ways that we watch out for each other. And what happens is the brain has to start making a lot of adaptations. So on any given day, the doctor needs to be called, and on any given day, the newspaper needs to be brought in, and then the coffee needs to be made, and then the medicine needs to be brought in, and then the medication needs to be changed so that the bandages can be there, and then the remembrance that we need to set that appointment, oh, and I need to cancel that one, and pretty soon our brain has got all this stuff going on that it has to adapt to. So it does what it's designed to do. It shifts into fight or flight. And we call that the sympathetic nervous system. And one of the ways to remember that is whatever's going on in the brain, the body is sympathetic to. It shows up a lot of times in the body as a sympathetic response. But we lose our ability to have logic. We lose our ability to analyze things. We lose our ability to remember things on a short term. I was writing down a note, the phone rang, the phone call, I don't know what I was doing. And if called, I can't answer. Because we don't need, the brain when it's got so many adaptations going on, that when all of this stuff is up there, it's like it's gone into a primitive place where it needs to scare away the saber-toothed tiger. And you don't need logic, and you don't need analysis, and you don't need memory, and you don't even need word processing to scare away a saber-toothed tiger. Sometimes all you need is to blow up like a pufferfish and make yourself seem as irritable as possible to scare away the saber-toothed tigers. So when we're dealing with anticipatory loss, sometimes we blow up like a pufferfish and we become extremely irritable, or we try to push people away. And that's all because this primitive process is going on. And sometimes it's confusing. We think, oh, why did I say that? Why did I treat that person that way? It's just because we got this weird process going on that's been around since we were hunter-gatherers and painting on walls. So we need to accept that breathing can bring us back into the rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system, where we gain those things back. But one of the things I loved about what Julia said is that we think we're going crazy, and we're not. We're not going crazy, we're going human. That's what it is to go human. So there's three specific areas I wanted to look at today, because I'm sure as Wendy and Julia and many of you on this conference can attest, we could go on for weeks, and there's so much richness and depth to explore and to share with each other that I need to sometimes, kind of go, oh, rein it in a little bit. And so I'm going to try to do that, but it ain't easy. I'm telling you. First thing is that whether you're dealing with anticipatory loss, one woman described it, her husband had Alzheimer's, and she said, after a while she would just say, well, we lost another tile off the roof today. That it was this gradual process, but she could have times when she could recognize it was happening. Sometimes things come by surprise. This is the nature of grief. Sometimes they have triggers. We see something on TV or in an ad, or we see the way another family gets to interact that we don't anymore, and these triggers can show up. So the first thing that I want to reinforce about grief that I think Julia brought up is how unpredictable it can be. So I demonstrate that with this pen. This pen is something that causes me to have a response in my grief. So I could be going along very nicely all day long. There is no pen showing up. And then all of a sudden I see a blue Ford Escort. And perhaps the person that I love drives a blue Ford Escort, or the person that I lost drove a blue Ford Escort, and there it is. And not only there it is, but there it is front and center, hard to see around. So these things can show up, and sometimes we know what triggers them, and sometimes we don't. We're only being human. We're just going human. So we have an assumptive worldview. This is point number one. Assumptive worldview, that's how we think the world is supposed to work. Parents are supposed to die before their children. Husbands are supposed to die before their wives. Your older brother is supposed to die before you do. Your younger sister is supposed to survive you. These are just constructs we've built to try to make sense of the world. With anticipatory loss, our assumptive worldview gets shattered. And so our compass points are lost, and our touchstones are lost. And so there's a rebuilding that takes place during anticipatory loss to begin to build this new worldview that incorporates this disease that's shown up or this accident that's occurred. And it's difficult to let go of that worldview, because what happens when it shatters is we begin to lose a lot of trust. And we need to be able to rebuild that trust, but rebuild it with a wiser understanding. That's not an easy thing to do, but it's important to recognize that that happens. To rebuild that trust, we have what's called the adjacent possible. We tend to think in binary forms. This is this, or this isn't this. Yes or no, on, off, black, white, whatever it is. And so in dealing with this assumptive worldview that's been shattered, we need to start having more choices, not just this, but more, so that we can go to one of those other choices. If I can't go to the store anymore, well, that doesn't mean I can't go to the store anymore. It means what? Well, maybe I have to order, maybe I have to get someone to do it for me. Maybe, I need to start exploring what my options are. And in exploring them, I have to be willing to say some of these may not work. And that's okay, because I can always step to one side, see what's there, step to the other side, see what's there, take a step forward, see what's there, take a step backwards. So what it is that after the assumptive worldview has been shattered, life becomes experimental. And we need to let go of our rigidity so that we can move into the fluidity of this experimental life. And we're going to do some things right, we're going to do some things wrong, we're going to do some things that help, we're going to do some things that hinder. We're not going to do it perfectly, but we are going to experience it, and we are going to gain wisdom by it. And we are going to be able to make it. And so being able to look for advice, being able to talk to people, sometimes being able to tell people, shut up, I don't want an answer, I just need to be heard. That can be part of this adventure of anticipatory loss. So we have the assumptive worldview. We have the adjacent possible, that we begin to look at things from multiple perspectives to see what might work. Now I want to go into grief yoga, and I'm going to switch my view on my computer. You're going to actually see my office. I am not on a cruise ship in the Inward Passage as much as I would like to be. But let's go up here, because if I don't do this, I'll have partial views going on. Now you're in my office. And so I would like you to participate with me in 2 grief yoga exercises. And these are things, when I'm working with people with anticipatory loss, one thing I remind them is they've never had to live this day before. And so that becomes our mantra. I've never had to live this day before. I don't have to know how to do it. Never had to do it. You don't get a rehearsal at this. So, and the other thing is, I want them to teach me what's happening for them, because I'm not the expert on their loss. And so every client, every patient that I get to meet is my teacher. And it's very exciting to be surrounded by so many teachers and just to be the student who then gives back what we hear. So, but here's our grief yoga. I'm going to try to get this where there's not too much glare. And if you can do this with me, if you have any arthritis or any limitation here, please honor yourself. But otherwise, there's 2 things we're going to do, and then I'll explain what they are after we've done them. If you're right-handed, you can use your right hand. If you're left-handed by nature, you use your left hand. It doesn't matter, whatever your dominant hand is that's comfortable, but you raise it slightly above your head for the first exercise. And keeping your head relatively level, you're going to put your eyes up toward your hand, and you're going to inhale as you bring that hand toward your face, inhaling through the nose, not all the way to the face, but just in front of it. So you're kind of like that. And then you're going to exhale as you move that hand across your body until this wrist part is past your shoulder. So it's going to go. So we're going to do that again. Up, eye contact, inhale, exhale, and one more time. Up with eye contact, inhale, and exhale. Now I'm going to ask you to use your non-dominant hand because we want to have some balance here, you know. And again, you're going to raise that hand so your wrist is slightly elevated toward the top of your head. And as you inhale through the nose, you're going to bring that hand back to the shoulder. And as you exhale through the mouth, you're going to take it across to the other shoulder, bring it back, and bring it down. So let's try that with inhaling to the shoulder, exhaling across, back over and down. And one more time, inhaling, across, back over and down. And one last time, inhaling, across, back over and down. These are 2 of the most important pieces of dealing with anticipatory loss. The first is put on your own oxygen mask before you help the person in the seat next to you. And so that's the purpose, just to make sure you got some good exercise on how to get that oxygen mask, put it on, and go here. Because your self-care is the difference between being in parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems a lot of times. How are you managing to take care of you? And you're going to say, if you're in that situation, you have no idea what it's like. The fact is, I do. I had my 2 aunts living with me when they had Alzheimer's, and I had 3 children under the age of 10. So I know what it's like to be the caregiver. I know what it's like to have someone taking off their clothes while you're trying to get everybody dressed. I know how hectic and crazy it can be. I know about 3 o'clock trips to the hospital when somebody thinks they've been put in jail and you have to go de-escalate them. So trust me, the reason I do this work is partly because of my experience with the work. And I know this is important. Put on your mask before you help somebody. This one is also important. When you reach back here, unless you feel a red cape with a big yellow S on it, you are not superhuman. And so if you do feel that cape, then stay away from kryptonite. But for the rest of us, this is usually where we forget that we are subject to the laws of physics. We are subject to fatigue. We are subject to needs. And our physiological needs need to be met before we can do anything else. So in anticipatory loss, for the person who's the caregiver, during that grief time, self-care is vital. And so rather than go on for 5.5 hours, as I so easily could, because I get, when we're grief counselors, we're really weird because we get excited about bereavement, it's like, it's really kind of, you just got to know this is what you're called to do, because otherwise you're just weird. But it's such an honor to be here with all of you today. It's such an honor to be the one. There's one of the things that one of my teachers taught me, Dr. Eric Gentry. He frequently says to his clients, "Thank you for allowing me to receive this from you." And it reminds me of the great honor that's been given when someone is sharing what their journey is with me and trusting me to hear them. So I thank you for the honor of offering, and I thank you for receiving. And now I give you back to Brenda.
Thank you, David. As always, informational, educational, and fun. And thank you for that yoga. It felt so good. I'm just glad I wasn't on camera. It wasn't smooth. But, thank you so much. So next up in our final panelist is Wendy Wynn. I should have practiced. Yeah, thank you. So Wendy graduated with a bachelor's and master's in social work at Sac State in 2014 and 2016. She's currently in the process of obtaining her LCSW, Licensed Clinical Social Worker. She has past experience with working in mental health field as well as the LGBTQ community. She's worked with UC Davis Home Care Services as a per diem medical social worker for 2 years in the past, and transitioned to a bereavement therapist for up to 2 years now. She is currently providing bereavement counseling to children, teens, adults, and older adults. She also co-facilitates bereavement support groups for the UC Davis Home Care Hospice Program. And lastly, she is also part of the Sacramento Hospice Consortium Bereavement Network Group, who is putting all these great sessions together, by the way. It's not me, representing UC Davis Hospice. So Wendy will share ideas for managing grief, including strategies and resources, along with references to work in this field. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Julia and David, for that overview of both grief and anticipatory grief. That yoga was really a good relaxation for that moment, David. Thank you. So yeah, today I actually wanted to share ideas on basically how we can make our grieving process a lot easier, to cope with our loss. So to start off is I would suggest to tell my clients, to allow themselves to experience the pain of loss, letting yourself grieve and fully experience the feelings, such as shock, sadness, anger, and even loneliness. To try not to judge yourself for any feelings that you may have, even if you think you shouldn't have them. Let yourself react in ways that help you process and release intense emotions, even if it means crying and even screaming. So some people actually, set aside private time every day to think about their loved ones and experience the feelings that actually arises. So this approach is actually helpful for those who actually have difficulty showing their feelings to others. So another idea is to actually manage your grief. It's important to recognize that you are grieving and tending to your emotions without judgment. Trying to be kind to yourself and giving time to process these emotions. It can be overwhelming. And that includes also being patient with yourself. The grief process, we don't know how long that will last. So allowing yourself to grieve and unfold, into a pace that is natural for you. Like I said, not judging, not criticizing yourself for not coping as well or healing as quickly as you think you should. Each person will need to grieve in ways that feels right for them. Another idea to manage your grief is, we talked about triggers, right? Trying to identify these triggers. You know, I have clients that share how, you know, songs will, you know, bring up these emotions, right? Facebook pictures from a year ago, you know, with the reminders that, wow, you know, it was, that happened. So a lot of times, you know, folks actually, you know, run into these incidents and, you know, it sets off these emotions. That can actually lead to becoming overwhelmed. So my feedback is to try to recognize, you know, what sets off these emotions, which can be helpful because in the future, hey, maybe you may confront it again. And at that time, you might be ready to process it, you know, ready to actually, hopefully, you know, the emotions will lessen at that time. And so another idea I would share is, you know, to talk about others, right? How we talked about how expressing these, they say that it actually helps with obviously releasing these feelings, help processing these emotions. But I would suggest that reaching out to your families, friends, or even anyone that you feel comfortable with um, will help with the process. And, you know, there are some people who feel like they're not ready to share. You don't want the help. You don't feel comfortable. You know, we talked about how some people feel like it's a burden for others. Well, there are other options. So not, you don't have to reach out to folks or your family members. You can try to be creative. So another creative way, what I often suggest to my clients is to journal. Write down how you feel. It is another way to process your thoughts, your feelings, your memories in a journal that can be kept private. You know, only you can read it, no one else. And even looking back at the journal, you know, may allow you to see how your grief changes over time. So another idea to manage our grief is to take care of ourselves. Very vital, like what David said, right? Self-care. So it's important, you know, to, for one, you know, attend to your physical needs, right? Because grieving can be emotionally and physically exhausting. Caring for yourself means, you know, trying to get enough sleep at night, eating a healthy diet, you know, checking in with your primary care physician, you know, for your physical exam even, and exercise, right? So, you know, engaging in physical activities. You know, people find that being physically active actually helps them cope with their feelings as well. So consider participating in activities that you might enjoy, such as walking, running, riding a bike, or even yoga, something like David had mentioned earlier. So even exercise and activities like even hitting a punching bag or hitting a golf ball at a driving range may even release some frustration, you know, some anger. So looking at time, another idea to advise is to take a break from grieving. You know, it is healthy to take breaks from grieving with pleasant activities and interaction with like social, supportive family members and friends. People need a break from pain of grieving because it is part of, you know, adapting to a loss, to go back and forth between focusing on the loss but also finding a way to be in the world without the person you lost. So, you know, some examples is to, you know, choose to go to dinner with some friends, maybe taking a relaxing bath, watch a movie, starting a new hobby, enjoying the outdoors even. So there are days where you may not even want to do anything, you know, and I've had clients that share that with me, you know, saying that, yeah, it's just not my day. You know, we're going to have our good days and our bad days, right? So it is good to still enjoy yourself, and it is okay to laugh, you know, feel happy despite your loss, because, you know, at the end of the day, we are still entitled to our happiness. Another idea I wanted to bring up is to maintain a routine. You know, keeping a basic routine of daily activities can actually help you structure your time and keep you connected to familiar people and even places. Some people actually find it helpful to avoid making major changes, such as, like moving, right? Or even a change of a new job even. This can help if you were to stick to a, normal routine, readapting to the life without our loved ones. It actually will help the grieving process to maintain a sense of normalcy, security, and then even lessen the additional stress, that might come up. Last but not least, I would say it's important to seek additional support or even information to work on your grief. Reading grief books, doing research online. I find that a lot of clients say that it's been a helpful tool for them, and basically with being more knowledgeable about what the grief looks like, I would also, advise, still reaching out to your support and your friends, right, in the process. But, of course, if friends are not available, your support, don't understand, there's that option to find professional help. So, learning about your grief and in the process of coping with it, they find that it is helpful to get outside help instead of family and friends, right? So a counselor can help people, work through their grief process in a one-on-one or even a group setting. So, to seek a therapist, a counselor for individual counseling, even talk to your primary healthcare provider, finding out if he or she can provide a referral to a therapist, or even checking out with a health insurance company through your, obviously, medical insurance, or even employer's employee assistance program. And if you can afford to pay out of pocket, oftentimes I actually refer my clients to psychologytoday.com. This is where a lot of folks are able to find, who they want as a therapist, because they tell you about their background, their knowledge, the fees, where they come from. And so it's recommended after I discharge them, and they find it helpful. So another support I would say through your grief is to actually look into joining bereavement support groups, which we mentioned earlier that I facilitate, and I believe David as well, right? And Julia, thank you. Right, so you can check out your local hospital, cancer treatment centers, a community hospice program, a support grief organization to get information on what they offer and what they have. And so I think that would be it for some ideas on how we can manage our grief. I know I wanted to actually include some information about what I do individually in my practice as a grief counselor. I wanted to share a theoretical approach on basically a psychologist named J. William Warden. He's actually adapted a well-known model called the 4 Tasks of Mourning. This is actually what I use in my practice to help guide my clients through the grief process. So I'm hoping that I'm okay with time, but I can kind of go over it quickly. Find that this is helpful to help clients to navigate, through their grief. So with task 1, it's recommended to accept the reality of the loss. When someone dies, even if the death is expected, there are times where they feel like there's like a sense of, feeling that they're still there. They will be coming back. They're on vacation. They're at work. Well, this task is telling you to, grieve, to allow this grief to come, but to come full face with the reality that they have died, that this person is gone and will not return, and at least, for this life. Task number 2 is to experience the pain of grief. One must allow themselves to experience and express the feelings, difficult it may be, allow these emotions to sink in. We talked about how society as a whole sometimes avoid it, right? And a lot of ways they try to be strong, or they try to avoid, having these painful thoughts, or even keeping busy, is one example, or no, a few examples. But there's no adaptive way of avoiding it. Can be unhealthy to even bottling it up. And it can actually manifest in negative ways. So allow yourself to feel and to lessen these emotions to feel better over time. The third task, to adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. This means different for different people. I mean, depending on what the relationship was like, survivors would have to develop new skills, responsibilities to take on new roles that was performed by the deceased. So this may include practical daily affairs, right, that they need help with, or advices to ask feedback about. So it means even trying to identify someone else that can actually help you with these tasks and to help you in the future. But the positive side about this task, I would say, is that, you may experience a sense of accomplishment by mastering some of these challenges that you may face. You learn more about yourself, and you actually grow as a person. So I have the last task, to find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. The final task is to find a way to reconnect and enjoy life while remembering the memories of the deceased. Trying to remain emotionally connected with them, but also trying to move forward in taking your memories and relationship with their loved ones in a manner that is healthy for you. So overall, the 4 tasks does not go in a linear order. People go back and forth. It can be worked and reworked with no timeline on when to complete these tasks. So it is a good model, to help guide folks, because, some people can get stuck, right? And they can recognize where they're at and actually go back and, work on it and maybe be able to, move forward. So just keeping in mind to generalize everything, each person's experience of grief is unique. Coping strategies, will look different for everyone. There's no specific time frame of how long your grief will last, but most people do find that the intensity of the grief will lessen over the course of time. And I think that's it for me.
The one question that came up was geared towards David, and Miss Ivory, one of our participants, was asking for, she was hoping for written scripts for the grief yoga that you did. I think that was pretty popular. So they were asking for those scripts so that they can help people in the future. David, are you on?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can certainly supply those. I don't have a written script, but I can put one together very easily. And I'm also thinking, because there's a couple of, I do laughter yoga sessions sometimes, and I'm thinking there's some other grief yoga positions that we could probably develop. So maybe our hospice has a YouTube channel, so I'll get with our marketing folks and see if maybe we could put up a little 10-minute grief yoga, YouTube demonstration as well. But I'll get the scripts written and I'll do that swiftly. Should I get them to you, Joy, or to Brenda? Who could distribute those?
So that's actually something I was going to mention. Was there something else that you wanted to say, Brenda? Sorry, I heard you talk.
Okay. Yeah, I figured one of you would, have that magic connection there. So I'll send it to you, Brenda. Nothing personal, Joy.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. I was actually basically going to thank all of our our amazing panelists for their expertise, sharing that with us. I also wanted to thank Miss Brenda for kind of helping keep us all organized and set up through this process. I want to thank all of our participants for having been here with us, but I wanted to remind you, this is a 4-part series. So today, as we were focusing on what is grief and identifying grief and talking about ways to kind of cope with grief, the next set in our series is going to be focused on our volunteers. And I want to invite anyone and everyone, even if you're not a volunteer, I want to invite you to participate, because there might be still some really good information, things that people have experienced, things that people are sharing that can impact you as well, give you some good insight on yourself, in your family, in your friends. I think it's going to be really beneficial. Like I said, even if you're not a volunteer, it's Grief During COVID-19 for volunteers, and that one's going to be the 30th, July 30th. So then the third one is Challenges for Caring for Patients and Loved Ones or Clients. That one's going to be August 13th, and these are the same time, so from 11 to 12. And the fourth is Grief During COVID-19, both for bereaved as well as for anticipatory grievers. And David kind of talked a little bit about what anticipatory grief is, but just wanted to let you know that those are coming up. They're going to have really good information, but the beauty of it is that they have been recorded. So I know that it's not always easy in the middle of your workday if you're not working and you've just got other things going on. Because these have been recorded, Brenda has agreed to post them on the SAC Hospice Consortium website. Some of you registered there. If not, I invite you, just go ahead and Google Sacramento Hospice Consortium and it's going to pop up right there. So she's agreed to post these webinars that can be viewed at any time. So feel free to view them again or share them with someone you know would benefit from the information coming from them, or might want to be a part of one of the live ones in the future. And she's also agreed to post our information as well. As you've heard these amazing speakers, they are all part of bereavement programs, and the support groups and the things that they offer. She's gonna post contact information for us and some of those resources on the SAC Hospice Consortium website. So we don't want to just educate you on grief and then send you on your way. We want, if you find that you or someone that you know or love is in need of those continuing resources, that continuing support, we want to make sure that it's there for you. So that was kind of it in a nutshell. I tried to speak as fast as possible because we only have a couple of minutes. But, just wanted to say again, thank you. This was incredible.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.